Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for coming. It's really good to see you here, and welcome to the 7th dialogue of the Imagining Futures If Dialogue series. And it gives me great pleasure to kind of oversee these dialogues, but also I think a huge privilege to be able to take part and engage with so many different projects and ways of thinking about egalitarian archival practices, which is what Imagining Futures is about, which is a project that we're running from 2020 to 2024. But to say it's a project really does not say very much about just how many people and voices and dialogues and experimentation and very challenging questions are being addressed by our partners, by our investigators, and by all those who contribute and are part of these discussions. Overall, what the Imagining Futures is about, it concerns issues of who gets to decide what is remembered into the future, and also the power of the archival process, both as process and also as object, which we understand in the broadest sense. And towards, one of the things we're going towards is an egalitarian archival practices manifesto. And that is something that these conversations are really building the foundations for. And the project is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And so today, like in the other dialogues, the way it's going to work is we're going to have brief introductions by me to our speakers and contributors. And then there will be a 10-minute presentation followed by a 5-minute response. And then we will have about a 20-minute discussion, and we will have 2 presentations. So if you'd like to contribute, just put your questions in the chat or raise your hands, either digitally or via a real hand. What we're going to do today is kind of have it the other way around from what we saw on the poster, just because there's a little bit of issue logging in by one of our teams. But hopefully that'll be overcome in the next half hour or so. So today presenting is going to be first Hanadi Samhain, Camillo Boano, and also Nanor de Boghossian as part of the team, and they will be presenting on Lebanese Yawmiyat. Forgive me if I mispronounce that, but I'll look forward to you pronouncing it, which means diaries, and that's about archiving unfinished stories of spatial violence. And responding to them will be Geraldine Frieslaar. So I'm just going to give you a few introductions to this team before we then move on to Valence Silayo, and Nancy Rushohora, and Geraldine, and Elizabeth Kiaziki will be responding to them. So just to introduce you a little bit to our presenters, I will start with Hanadi Samhain, who is an urban practitioner, and her professional experience is focused in the private sector, working in managing a variety of urban design projects, master plans, spatial strategies, and also regeneration schemes for cities in the East and beyond that. She's currently a PhD candidate at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, the DPU at University College London, where her main research focuses on the politics of the vertical in the camps of Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. And the vertical is here used as a noun rather than adjective, as a tool of analytical inquiry into understanding the changing spatiality in the camp and the topological relationship in the city. She's also, of course, co-investigator for this Imagining Futures project, which they will be discussing today. And also working on this team is Nanor de Boghossian, the project. She's one of the main graphic designers and artists on the project. And her work is, in fact, in graphic design and also user experience, where she works in a variety of creative fields. She's also the art director for the Armenian Artists Network in Switzerland, which is a platform for the Armenian artists to connect and bridge with each other and other Armenian artists from different countries. And working with them and leading this particular project, also one of the key partners of Imagining Futures is Professor Camillo Boano, who teaches at the Urban Design, or the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, and who also is co-director of the UCL Urban Laboratory. And he's also teaching at the Architecture and Urban Design at Politecnico di Torino in Italy. Camillo's research centers on the complex encounters between critical theory, radical philosophy, and urban design processes, and specifically engaging with informal urbanizations, urban collective actions, as well as crisis-generated urbanisms. And alongside engaging with imagining futures, he's working on a series of interconnected research initiatives in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and also the Middle East on urban infrastructures, habitability, and the urban project. And responding to this theme will be Geraldine Frieslaar, who is currently the curator of research, dialogue, and social justice at the Stellenbosch University Museum. And among the exhibitions she has curated is one on Ubuntu and social justice. Her own research is an historian of museum and heritage studies and has included work at the Cape Town Holocaust Center, FICA and Natural Resource Management. And she has held positions as director of the South African History Archive in Johannesburg. She's an archivist at the Robben Island Museum and researcher at the District Museum. And her dialogical work on social justice seeks to recalibrate the relationship of museum collections to the wider publics. So I now give over to this team to hear about their latest project they've been working on over this last year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna start. Can I share the screen? Right. Yes.
Yep,
okay.
You should be able to share the screen now. Yeah,
right.
Go ahead.
Give me a second. Sorry. Okay. All right. Let me know if you see it.
Yep, that looks good.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Lena. We do try to be very quickly, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak for a few moments and then I'll pass it on to my colleague, and you see all the people that have been working onto the project. The way we have organized our little presentation is a little introduction on the project overview and a little reflection on the way we have collected the stories and built the narrative, and specifically the last part towards the launch of the platforms, that is a sort of digital platform repository. We want to speak on three different reflections, specifically the way in which we have conceived, work, and collected and researched what we call the spatial trajectories, the timeline, so the way in which we have constructed the timeline of the different events, and the way we have choreographed, if you want, the stories and the different characters that are part of the project per se. The project focus very much on the stories of daily life violence. And we have very much considered the fact that violence is intrinsically part of the shaping of urban space, and specifically grounded into Beirut urban spaces. And therefore, the entry point of the theories was really much, the theories of the project was really much to define a grammar, if you want, of different ways around which different traumatic moments speaks of crisis on one way, but also the way in which they present, they show, they reflect on possible, in a way, brighter or different future. In order to do that, what we have been trying to focus, both in terms of the stories, the material, the space, and the narrative, in reflecting onto the project on the archive, we have been thinking on the archive as, and I'm here referring to the work of Anna Manning recently, where she speaks of the fact that archive is an archive of time past. It's an archive of time for a restaging of that past that orient towards a certain notion of repair. And for us, the notion of repair remains very central to maybe the concept of the egalitarian reflection of the manifesto that we are developing. The archive, of course, is that carries forward the marking of what might remain legible across a breach of time, but it's also necessary to pause with the myriad valuation that given object is relevant towards the passage of time. So we don't want to reflect on the archive with, specific forms of object in stories, but we wanted to give the archive as a lens, and again, with the word of Herringman, on what is carried forward, giving us a measure of what should be value in the now, in the present, and therefore trying to break or disrupt the notion of crisis that specifically in Beirut is shaping, forging the imagination of both the present and the future. Of course, the meaning of the archive and all the work was grounded very much into an inevitable reference to Walter Benjamin reflection, when he says that the true image of the past flits by, and the past can be seized only as an image that flashed up at the moment of its recognizability, and it's never seen again. And therefore, the way to this idea of archive, to using different images to mobilize different narrative of images that are not fixed, but somehow become trajectories. They build, they made, they become space into that. And with this kind of very generic entry point, I'm passing on to Hanadi for the rest part of the presentation that speaks very specifically on the way we have organized the material, the way we have constructed the platforms, and the way we have imagined now to construct the narrative of the launch of the platform. Hanadi, over to you. And I can move the slides.
Yeah. Okay, so okay. We actually, this is, what we, as Camillo said, we try to present elements and how we built the scope and the way even to share with you how we thought this project and even the outcomes of it. So what we did is that we critically listened here in capital, in the sense that we engaged actually with the stories that we listen to people, and we try to construct a narrative from these stories. The narrative in the meaning that how those people actually stories interacted, moved between scales, went back into present, past, and future, and how does it interact with our own experiences. Now, Camillo, shall I share my screen, or shall I say next?
It's okay. If you say next, I'm happy to do
it. So basically, what can stories tell us? So what we learn is that the ambivalence of some stories between fact, fiction, reality, and fantasy, testimony, exaggerations sometimes, is embedded in the difficulty of representing and conveying their traumatic reality. The reality that they live is super traumatic. So what we learned is that reality is tainted with continuous persistent danger, and I'm quoting here from our interviews, is that, like by Lamia, we're always living with the idea of danger. There's apathy, and apathy is the dominant feeling, and I'm quoting from Sami, no one gives a damn about it and about us. There are multiple forms of injustice that are endured, and Lamia said we live in a society with no justice at all. And Muna and the feeling of I would say genealogical distrust that has built up when Muna expressed that we don't trust the government anymore, we don't trust our leaders and politicians, and this is something genealogical and generational. So eventually what we learned through this project is, although violence is the common term, is something general, it's the understanding or the perception of violence is also subjective. Now, through imaginations and through intersecting these spatial narratives and the stories of people, we were able to, that they have collectively normalized a subreal construct where the basic rights of safety, security, dignity, and justice were stripped away. So we are also able to understand emergent self-reliance tactics that are continuously created and sustained, and we actually were able to categorize them into two categories: that coping through patterns of detachment, and this is how people related to space, and the other one is what was the other one? It's the entrapment or intimacy. Yeah. So if you so Camillo, if you go back just one click. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read quickly some quotes from the stories, and we'll tell you how we were able to define these broad themes. So this is by Mahmoud, and Mahmoud is basically who was he's a young student who was beaten during the demonstrations, 17th November demonstrations. So for him, describing when we asked him about the port explosion and how did you relate to the port explosion, which was a massive explosion. Yeah. One more. Yeah. No, previous. One more. Yeah. So after the port explosion, I'm quoting, and after the protests were terminated, meaning the downtown was the same. It became a touristic site, a place for people to come and observe what happened. The signs, the people, the road, and the drawings that were made on the roads. The effects of all the protests are now, as well as the explosions, are the same. So to him, basically, what he endured in the downtown demonstrations actually is the same as the port explosion. Although if from a different position you would look at the two incidents, they're completely different in terms of impact, a physical or a spatial impact, I would say. Also, Mahmoud lost some kind of connections to the city core, to the downtown. And he said there was, when we asked him how often now do you go to the downtown, he said there was no reason to go more to the downtown. I think I went once with some friends or some family members who were outside and were coming to Lebanon for the first time after the protest. So they wanted to see what happened and I just go with them. It's no longer an area of social gathering with friends and so on. It's just a touristic site area, which I'm not interested in. So this kind of detachment that we were able to identify. Also, Karina is, her house was facing the Beirut port and it was massively, the house was massively devastated. And she said, well, frankly here, and this is kind of detachment, I'm also referring to the detachment. Frankly, I don't get that some areas, the electrical current does not, the electrical currents or the electric shortage, I mean here, does not go away at all. And in some other areas, we have just a few hours per day. I think there's no crisis. They are just lying to rob us more and more. So here, the detachment from the existing conditions that electricity is not provided for everyone in the country is kind of detachment. I mean, so she doesn't believe in reality anymore. She thinks that there is a conspiracy theory in this. It's not the way that we or any other person would relate to this fact. So Camillo, next bit. So entrapment or intimacy, and here by listening to people's stories, we were able to identify two types of belonging to the space. Either some of them feel entrapped, that they don't have alternative choice, or other will feel there are some kind of intimacy to the place, a very special, unique form of intimacy. So Lean, for example, Lean from the Shuf, and there was the massive fire that happened in 2019, and she said, asking her about the feeling or why did she leave the house, she said, you feel you are trapped and in despair, where to go, what to do. We stayed in the house till 5 in the morning. When it felt obvious there's no way we can stay in the house anymore, they left, basically. So this is kind of entrapment. For Hiba, for example, and Hiba, she's from Tariq Jdide, and there was a massive also explosion that happened there. And it's a very dense neighborhood. And she said, there's nothing that you can do. It's that we are fatalist and believe in destiny, and that you cannot run away from what is predestined to you. So it's I would say the absolute belief in God's destiny. So maybe if the day of the explosion, I was still in my place and asking her about how does she relate to the explosion itself, I would have not even been harmed, even if I was sitting in the salon. So basically, she believes in her destiny. It means that she believes that her life is gonna go on, whether she was in the house during the explosion or not. This is kind of intimacy to the place through, I would say somehow of religious intimacy to a place. Now, I'm gonna skip because we don't have a lot of time. Now, and here now we want to tell you the story, how we built the scope. So basically, these are the stories, the stories that we listen to the people. And then we try to connect these stories to the events that happen. So we tried to look at the explosion of the port itself on the 4th of August 2020, where there's like 7,500 injuries. And then we tried to build up all the events that happened before that date, from the revolution to the, I would say, explosions, the fire, everything that happened during this period, add to it the COVID-19 pandemic, dysfunctional political vacuum, and accelerated devaluation of the local currency. Now, so what we learned is that, and now we're going to show you afterward with the timeline of the events and crises that we mapped, is that this is not something new that happened in Lebanon. The explosion was not like something unexpected, basically. If you go back in time and you map all the events that happened, this is some kind of thing that is expected somehow. And the destruction was not something new. Now, this time was completely something out of scale, I would say. This is why it was so put in focus. So next. So what we tried, okay, so yeah, okay. So what is the project is about? The project was to mainly frame the reflections of violence by constructing people's narratives as a form of everyday life archives. And it resolved an ambitious alternative way for writing a unified unwritten history of Lebanon, because to that, until today, there is no unified history in Lebanon because of the civil war, I would say. It has the power to reveal connected stories, enhance understanding of current and previous events / crises, and reduce exacerbated internal conflict. So how we did it? Basically, we collect, okay, you're skipping, Camillo, which means, do you want me to be faster? I think it's trying to control the pace. Okay. Okay. Very briefly, how basically collect and access and preserve people's stories, personal memories. This is what we try to do, collect everything from these people, like their pictures, audios, like even some scans of the person that he was beating, like everything that can relate to the event they're describing. And we try to open up the use of existing, we're thinking about opening up the use of existing archival materials that are usually sensitive in some cases, with the purpose of creating new ones and articulate methods of egalitarian archival practices that respect multiple and divergent narratives, and to aligning with the overall project objectives. Now, okay, so okay, I'm gonna skip the previous slide. Is that why Yawmiyat and why Lebanese Yawmiyat? I mean, we said it specifically because Lebanon has not to date a unified history. So we thought of the importance of these Yawmiyat or diaries from Lebanon. The question that we had, so, okay, where to start from? Who are these people that we're trying to identify? Are they going to accept to talk to us? Because some of the events are really political. So we started to check our networks, friends, extended friends, family, extended family, and even colleagues, because we're all enduring the same stories. We talked to people about the project, and many, I would say, were very enthusiastic to share their stories. Few refused to share their stories, and actually they blocked us because of, again, political reasons. Although here I have to mention that even when people were telling us their stories, we had the feeling of some filtering of very specific events, I would say. Now, others were somehow skeptical about recording the interviews. Nonetheless, they were all willing to share their stories. 10 stories we collected from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. We made it sure that we cover, I would say, diversity in Lebanon, which is economic, socioeconomic, geographies, age, I would say sectarian even, and for us to be able to ask about their experiences and reflections in relation to a specific event, as well as other crises currently ongoing in Lebanon. Okay, so this is just to, from an ethical concerns, because somehow it's a bit sensitive in the sense when people were telling us their stories, as if they were reliving the crisis. So we were very, I mean, the interviewees, Huda, she conducted most of, I would say, all the interviews. She had the experience in how to talk to interviewee and how to take breaks when it's needed. If some of the retelling the events were triggered by certain questions. and we have the clearance from the DPU. Yep. So the first seeds here and what we did. So we recorded the interviews. Interviews were shared among the team members, all of us. We were five, I would say, 5 or 6. And we actually analyzed, we went into an analysis of these stories. We analyzed what we read, of course, but every one of us in the team comes from a different background, from a different geography. I'm a Palestinian Lebanese, Nanor is Armenian/Lebanese, Huda is from Beirut, Dina also from Beirut. We had Luna, also she has a different background. So we were all reflecting on these stories from our backgrounds, and then we were able to construct these different broad themes. So these stories overlapped, coincided, and diverged across different people, including our own personal stories and living the same realities and the daily struggles. Next. Yep. So very briefly here, we did actually, the first thing we did, we want to add the spatial dimension to these stories. So we developed what we call the spatial trajectories, in the sense that every story we heard is translated into a map. And Camillo, can you go to this? Yeah. So again, this is basically the locations of the interviews that we've done. They're actually based in Beirut. We have interviewees from Beirut, one from Shuf, another from Ankara in the further south. Yep. So I'm not going to go over all the spatial trajectories we've developed, but we actually made 9. We separated, so it's 10 spatial trajectories map. Each one of the map is a representation of the story itself. So I can talk about this briefly, and this is Mahmoud, who was this young student. He was beaten during the demonstrations, and if you can see here the trajectory, the road, actually the ring road, which is in the downtown, where actually all the violence that he was subject to occurred. His journey also to the police station is kind of documented. He shared with us his jaw, the picture of the scan of his broken jaw. The first picture during the first days of the demonstrations, people were extremely thrilled about what's happening. And later on, the pictures on the left side, bottom left side, where actually he was beaten, dragged by the police, and to calm down and to end up basically all the demonstrations that were happening. Now, if you, Camillo, just scroll slowly across along these slides, this is in the Shuf, for example, and it shows the scale of the fire. This is Ain Akana explosion, and it was in the further south. No one knows what happened in Ain Akana, just that there was an explosion there. I guess it's unknown until this moment. This is actually a compilation of things. So this is it's about 2 characters. One of them has lost her job, and another was in constant relocation and looking for appropriate housing. And he told us the whole story before the demonstration and before the port explosion. Like, it was like a continuous struggle to find affordable housing. Okay, we can skip. Okay, this is I would say the most important effective issue, which was the Lebanese collapse, the banking sector collapse in Lebanon, where actually banks hold up the money of the depositors, and people were not allowed to withdraw their monies. So basically, the ATM locations here and the trajectories of people, the queues that were actually next to the banks, recreated the space itself. So people were queuing for, I would say, meters and kilometers of queues to be able to enter into the bank and withdraw a very tiny amount of money. People lost their savings, and it's not yet clear what's going to happen until today. You could see here the pictures of the queuing at the left corner side, the bottom one. Yep, we can, okay. Now this is the story of the shortage of medicine in Lebanon, because medicine I mean, became unavailable for many reasons, basically because of the financial crisis, and the government was not able to subsidize these medicines. So the medicines were not available because of corruption, because of the commercial aspect to it. So there were some kind of pharmacies now for us in Lebanon has become really like a landmark, where actually we know all the pharmacies where they lie in, and we have to check for every medicine and to go around and to ask all the pharmacies within our area, our region, and sometimes go beyond. Okay, I think I'm gonna skip here, Camillo. Yeah. Now, I'm gonna talk a bit thoroughly about the timeline, and then we can.
Sorry, Hanadi.
Yeah,
it's already. I think we're going to have to stop in a bit, because otherwise there won't be any time for a response or the other presentation. I know so much that you've put into this. I wonder if you could just summarize towards the end and go through the images. That would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll go, Camillo, if you scroll down. Yeah, okay. One more. Okay, can you animate it just to, yeah. Okay, you see, this is the timeline, basically. This is the timeline of events that we try to map everything that was happening in Lebanon from 2005 until 2022. And 2005, because of the, I would say, two events, the withdrawal of the Syrians from Lebanon and the assassination of the prime minister. So it's kind of like a major breakout. And we try to map everything that's happening, and we categorize them into different categories with different intensities. And you can see here, like, we have 5 categories: security, assassinations and internal conflict. We have wars and external aggressions, protests and crisis. Yeah, and these blue dots are the political events, and you can see how many political events were happening before the 2020. Okay, we link these events to the characters that we talked about, that we try to invent here. So, and we actually invented characters, the stories of the people we talked to them. We tried to invent their visual image, and trying to not to stick to the sectarian stereotyping of Lebanese. So we tried as much as possible to be diverse and to reflect the traumas and the current violence that these people are subject to. You would see, for example, Sami holding the pharmacy bags, like, because he's in constant search of medicine and so on. And finally, I would say this is the platform, and I will skip where Nanor can just show you briefly the website. It's still in a beta version. It's still work in progress. We didn't yet finish. So Nanor, would you like to go through the website?
Yes.
Yeah.
Should I
share very briefly, Nanor, because we really will only have about 2 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, for Geraldine to respond, she needs about 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Can anybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so the website starts with the splash page of the Yawmiyat. We have the introduction. Okay, so let's say we go to home. This is the floating elements, and each element represents each characters. We have 10 characters. Let's
Nanor,
say
I think we're not seeing that. We just see the slides, the PowerPoint.
I think it's my internet. Now you can see.
Just the PowerPoint again. So I don't know if we
see it not from the presentation view, but just the cover slide.
I think my internet is slow.
Nanor, I wonder if while you see if you can get it working, would you think it would make, I mean, do you think it will work in a minute, or should we have allow Geraldine to respond to the presentation? And then if you can get it working, you can maybe just put it up for very briefly after that?
I can share it if you want, Nanor. You talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, yes,
okay.
you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so this the floating elements represent each character. We have 10 characters. For example, if we click on piggy bank represents Sammy. Sammy is the retired character or personality who represents the character who all his money is in our bank and we cannot have it. For example, if we go to any other character like Mahmoud, again, we will have the broken jaw of Mahmoud. If we go and we have the trajectory plan of Mahmoud, how he went through the whole demonstration steps. If we go to remnants,
timeline?
No, remnants.
Okay.
The main page of remnants. Okay. Each remnant, actually, if we scroll a bit down, they have their own stories. So we can click on stories on the play, and you can hear their own interview, their own voice. If we click on, let's say, Sammy or Mahmoud, whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can hear. We can hear their interviews, what their experience through all the period of demonstration and what they are going through.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Fine.
We can go to the timeline. So this is the interactive timeline. As Hanadi was saying in the PowerPoint presentation. Again, we have the 10 characters above. They are interactive. Each character is linked to the specific dates, and the blue, the dots that you can see on the timeline, they are the information, the description of each event. If you click on it, you will have the description in a bigger scale, in a bigger, on a big pop-up.
Yep.
And again, for example, Lifeline is where it's going to happen in the future, of course. The events, the news, the seminars about the Yawmiyat, the talks, the workshops, everything will be, this section will keep us live. The project will be live through this section, actually. Everything will be putting in this section. It's under construction, but it will come soon. The gallery section, it belongs to a context map where we have the 10 characters, the project archive, which will be everything archiving in the project. And team and friends will be, let's say, if I have pictures from explosion, each one of us have his own pictures. So we're collecting all these pictures to put it in the website. And about the project, which is still under construction, it will be all documented here about the project, the process, the team, and under the download, the last one, it will be, we will be putting the Excel sheet of the project, the most important things, let's say, and the user experience, the users, let's say, they can download it, they can have the full information of the data, because we cannot put everything in the timeline because it's huge information.
Yeah, I think we're done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's incredibly rich and powerful. And I think just without further ado, we'll go straight. Geraldine, if you're ready, we will go straight to you for a response. And I think in terms of the discussion, you could do maybe a brief response to Geraldine, but the main discussion we'll leave to after Nancy and Valence's discussion, if that's all right. Thanks so much, Geraldine. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much to the presenters for that really rich and insightful discussion. I will try and use up my 2 minutes quickly so we can get to the rest.
You have 5. You have 5.
Okay. So also thank you for sharing your draft article with me. I think that also helped contextualize the slideshow much more, better for me. When I was reading particularly through the draft article and listening to your presentation now, what struck me is, and this was years ago, when I did a postgrad diploma in Museum and Heritage Studies, one of our prescribed reading was by Nadia Serematakas, and she wrote on memory of the census. So while I was reading and listening to you, all three of you now, that came up about how, especially the language that you used, also both in your article and your presentation about the perpetuation of violence, really struck a chord with me, because I think, Lebanon has its own set of problems, but it's also, and I'm sure many other parts of the world, post-conflict zones in particular, share that kind of resonances with Lebanon in that sense, where it's usually characterized by urban violence, which is just another form of, how the violence perpetuates itself in different forms, such as, like in South Africa, in the Western Cape, on the Cape Flats, it would be gangsterism that supplanted that apartheid structure that we had in South Africa. So I was really struck by that, and just how you described it, how it's almost poignantly how, that's why I was thinking about that particular reading of Memory of the Census. And then your colleague Camillo, how he described the archive, and Walter Benjamin, I love his thinking around the archive in particular. So that is a new quote that I'm going to steal from Camillo. In South Africa, we have our own, star archivist. His name is Vern Harris. And I just thought of what Vern Harris wrote in an article a long time ago about how the archive is found within us and around us. So to come back to the living archive of these stories that you are busy collecting. So I'm just going to say that I want to actually leave you with 3 questions that I had for you. In one of the slides, you were speaking about a unified unwritten history of Lebanon. That was one of the motivations for the project. So, and you also say it's very ambitious, right? So the only question I had about that part was the unified, because for me as an historian, although technically I kind of straddle the academic and the practitioner side of it. For me, there are multiple stories. There's not just one unified story. And I think I do understand what you mean by having a unified, unwritten history, as those marginalized histories. But in the same sense, my kind of training is that I want to hear those diverse stories, because that is almost like a cacophony of voices to make sense of, or what the government, for example, is not telling you. So that was the first question. Was that a deliberate, did you use unified deliberately, or, what was the motivation for that? And secondly, you were also talking about, you opened up the existing archival material that are sensitive. What processes did you follow to be able to do that? For example, in South Africa, we have to use a legislation, an act called POPIA, which is basically to get access to material that has been classified, that has already lapsed, but government put these things in place to make it more difficult to get a hold of what they deem as sensitive material. So you not POPIA, sorry, PIA, Promotion to Access to Information Act. So if you need to get not classified information, but just information from the National Archives, then you have to use that act. So did you have to use something similar? That's the question. And last question is, so in my former life, I worked for an NGO, a couple of NGOs, and when we had to do projects, especially where it concerns the affected communities, and I'm actually also glad that you, Hanadi, preempted that question, because I was going to ask about the ethics around it. So that is not my question, but we have in South Africa at least NGOs that have worked with District 6 Museum, South African History Archive, when we do projects with communities, and it involves oral history, interviews, etc. Usually, what is the incentive for the communities to get involved in that? Do you have a moment, perhaps, or a workshop where you share your findings with the community, and how accessible is, for example, your website to the people that you have interviewed? Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to listen to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Geraldine. That was great. Thank you so much. There's a lot there. Do you think Hanadi, Nanor, Camillo, and maybe Hoda who's there as well, if you can answer that within 5 minutes, but not longer, because otherwise we really won't have time for Nancy and Balance to present, and Elizabeth to respond. But I'd love to hear, and I'm sure Geraldine would as well, some of the reflections on that.
I mean, I can answer on the, okay, I'll structure the answer very quickly, and Huda can answer on one question. So for the first one, the ununified, ununified, unwritten history of Lebanon. I mean, it's in Lebanon, it's, I mean, because the country endured the 15 years of civil conflict, until today, there's not even a partial of a story of why the war happened. And there's always a conflicting, I would say, narratives about who caused the war and who was engaged and why it emerged. So we thought that this living archive can work as a source of data when the history to be written about Lebanon and what happened in 2020 and even before the revolution. This will be some kind of people's stories, actual people's stories, and this is why we say this is very ambitious, because the idea is to make this platform is an interactive platform, in the sense in the future people can add to this website and to include their stories. So we now included 10 stories, but there are, like, I would say, I don't know how many stories are there happening because of the violence, and it's still there. This is one thing. So I would say for the incentives of community, some people were really, really keen to talk to us about what's happening, and they wasted their time with us. Now, others were not very encouraged to talk to us, especially when I talked about sensitive, but sensitive here, it's not about legalization of the topic itself. It's about how people are afraid from being followed or chased by certain political parties in the country, because the state is not actually governing everything in Lebanon. It's a hybrid model of governance in the country. So political parties are still prominent and effective. So some of them they actually rejected or they declined from going into the interview at last minute because they were either connected to political parties and they didn't want to be seen and or share their stories, and other where they don't belong to anyone, so they were free to and very happy to share their stories with us. Last question, maybe Huda can, do you want to add about the interviews? Yeah, I'm not sure if, because internet connection in Lebanon is really not great. Yeah, probably yeah. Okay, so I'm not, this is my answers. If anyone would like to add, Camillo, Huda, Nanor.
Maybe one quick things. I think it's a very important point, the one you, Geraldine, raised. We have been thinking about that. Although this is an early stage to a certain extent. First, we have been trying to get out of this idea of community initially, and trying to look more in a broader sense of urban spaces and individual, if you want it. So it's very different settings in some. So one of the things that has happened is returning to the interviewees and their network, if you want to return both the access of the material, strengthening the, the verification, the access to that, and also having follow-up conversation, and therefore allowing the availability of the data. It's not really a community per se, so identifiable as a neighborhood or as a group. And that is something that we have been struggling. Of course, the idea is to return as much as possible to that and opening as much as possible the possibility of access to the data. It's very tricky because none of us is super expert into platforms. We see the potentials into that. We struggle with the feasibilities of the limited both resources and time to shape the project towards the end. And this is not a critique at all. It's the fact that is a kind of a proxy possibility to allow a sort of more direct use of technology that would help individuals to bring their own story. We know that Instagram and Facebook already exist to do that, but they capture a different essence of the individuality, where here there's a more curational dimension into that. So it's an interesting gap to do that, not only with the availability of data, but really through what infrastructures to construct that idea. So it's a very important point to continue to think about it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what we'll do is we'll stop this conversation now, but pick it up again once the other presentation has also gone and had a respondent. So thank you so much for that. And I will just move straight to Nancy and Valence. I think hopefully they're ready, and I'm very happy, Nancy and Valence, to move the slides for you if that works. So maybe if you want to show your videos, that's great. If you can't, that's also fine. Just let me know, but you might want to mute yourselves while I introduce everybody who is in this project. Okay, so next we have Nancy Rushohora and Valence Silayo, who will be responded to by Elizabeth Kiazike, and they will be presenting on past, present, and future memory of the French slave trade in southern Tanzania. And Nancy Rushohora is a lecturer in the Department of Archaeology and Heritage Studies at the University of Dar es Salaam. And her research interests include the archaeology of resistance, trauma and heritage, photographs and memory, which she has written about during her time as a postdoctoral fellow in the studies in historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch University of South Africa. So very much picks up on a lot of strands we've just been talking about in the previous project. And current focus of a number of her projects are connected to the transgenerational memories of the Maji Maji War in Tanzania, 1904 to 1908. And she's particularly investigating the removal and restitution of human remains from Tanzania to Germany and engaging with the use of the War Landscape Museum and Memorials. And within Imagining Future, she's the lead on the Lindi Lab, or the Tanzania Lab. And leading the lab with her is Dr. Valence Silayo, who's a lecturer in history, archaeology, and heritage management at Tumaini University and Dar es Salaam College. And his research interests are in African archaeology, pre-colonial defense systems and technologies, pre-colonial socio-political systems, and social complexities for small-scale communities, and particularly chiefdoms. And this he also coordinates with community heritage management, especially working on the issues of repatriation and heritage objects. He has coordinated diverse fieldwork along the coast of Eastern Africa and also in northern Tanzania. And responding to their work will be Dr. Kiazike, Dr. Elizabeth Kiazike, who is currently a senior lecturer in the Department of History, Archaeology, and Heritage Studies in Kiambogo University in Uganda, where she's also the Dean of Faculty of the Arts and Humanities. And her research has centered on the Constitute phenomena. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, if I pronounced that wrong. Please do correct me when you come to do your response. That would be great. But what this means, it's a group of delayed return hunter-gatherers. She's also done some groundbreaking work in Uganda as a development archaeologist, which incorporates the sensitive documenting of memories. And it is really in this capacity where her work intersects with that of Nancy and Valence, and also Elizabeth's leading role on one of the Imagining Futures project, which documents the memories of slavery and the slave trade at Fort Patico, which was one of the key market centers where slaves were taken. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Nancy in Balance and then on to Elizabeth. Nancy, would you like me to put on your PowerPoint?
Yes, please. So our presentation today is about the interaction with the French slave trade in Tanzania. And specifically, we are talking about a Mgao site. And Mgao site is a village that make a maritime border between the two regions in southern Tanzania, which make a border with Mozambique. The interaction there with the memory has three important elements, which is the archive, the transgenerational memories, and the landscape and monuments that have remained there. So very little is actually known about the French slave trade in the South Tanzania. So beside the fact that the French are known to have traded with Kilwa and another site in Ngoyo, there is little knowledge in Tanzania about what really took place and what was left behind. That can be attested to the connection between the French and the people of the southern part of Tanzania. So in the archives, it was around 1784 that the French explained their interest in Mgao. They established that relationship, and the first ship actually arrived in Mgao in 1784. And upon arrival, they established their presence by building a warehouse, which is on the next slide, Lena.
For a second.
Slide,
if it's easier for you to stop your video and just talk, that's also fine, Nancy, whatever you think is better, but we can't hear you at the moment.
You cannot hear me? Can you hear me now?
I hear you now, Nancy.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that the French presence is actually well documented in the archives, that around 1784 is when the French interest was established, and it was about that time that the French arrived in Mgao. They actually praised it that the slaves there were cheap, and also in the document it indicated that it was a major place that they collected areas such as Mauritius plantations. Now, this type of history is very important in studies of slave trade, and the European countries is kind of less as compared to the connection of slave trade with Asia. also researchers have emphasized on the connection of slave trade with Arabs and Middle East, whereas the European part has been forgotten. And the archives had it in detail that this was the amount of slaves that were taken to Europe. So the Portuguese and the French at the bottom being leading in that aspect. And details such as that of small sites articulating different memories of slave trade have been, for instance, in the Chap Kusimba, among the Yamas, he managed to establish that some of the unique ways that the slaves were using as ammunition to themselves included witchcraft, using poisoning and magic to escape from prison, from slave trade perils. And now the Mgao case is also another unique one, which indicates that for them to run away from slave trade, the encounter between the French and the local people in Mgao resulted to them migrating from the place that the French expressed interest to about 20. The slaves, the French will not enslave their people. So this small information about individual sites are standing as agents of what happened in terms of encounter between slave traders and the local people in different places. And this encounter has always not been the same, but quite diverse. Now, the memory that is in archive is actually different from what the local people remember, and also some of the information that are found on the ground. So despite the fact that the archive states that the encounter, the French had their presence in Mgao in 1784, the local community have no idea about that encounter. To them, they only know the Arabs who came in their land, and they also offered the land to the Arabs and not to the French. And there is also something that is perplexing, the fact that the French warehouse that was shown previously, it has an attachment of a mosque in the same place. And again, 7 kilometers away from the French warehouse and where the mosque is found, there is a tomb with the inscription that you have just seen there, which indicates that the Arabs were in that particular location. And according to on the tomb is actually that of Abdi Haki, which means it's an Arabic name other than a French name, apart from the inscription and the nature of the tomb itself. It is a pity that the year, because the year of burial is also indicated there, but it is one of those fading letters that cannot be established explicitly which year was this person buried there. Now, what is interesting is that the same memory is taken out to schools and also to everyday life. So the people of Mgao, when they speak about the foreigners who used this particular site, they never refer to the French, but they refer to the Arabs. And one of the Imagining Future project was about collecting the narrative that are found in schools about the same site. And it indicated that the student at school and the teacher with slave trade was with the Arabs. And nobody is mentioning the French in the same site. So this gives us the past and the present status of the French memory of slave trade in Ngao. Now I will welcome Valence to come in with as the future of landscape narrative arcade.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll just continue there and want to now to bring up what holds the future of Ngao or Mongolo, as Nancy has described. As Nancy has described, is that Ngao is a coastal village, and the community's economy relies heavily on the coastal resources. They are fishing, boat building, shell collection, you name it, everything that they want, they get it from the ocean. So they take it as the backbone of their economy. And as it stands along the coast with their past history, the Tanzanian government has in its developmental plans has designated Ngao as one of the potential touristic villages. It is the local communities. Let's slow down the slides a little bit. Yes, the local communities, I said, they cherish their coast. From the young children, as you can see from the slides, they enjoy getting fish from the ocean. The communities and also their market along the coast. So they rely entirely on the coast for their daily living and for their daily living and the economy in general. Next slide, please. The Ngao project has also decided to restore this building, the monument which Nancy just described, and we have engaged the community to see the possibility of restoring this building, this monument, and the community has welcomed this innovation, this idea with 2 hands, with all their support. However, the community has asked some number of questions that they will need to be considered before we restore the building. One of the things that the community were very keen about it is to know whether the building after restoration, will it take the modern form or will it retain its nature, its authenticity, and originality. And the second question they were keen to get response is, what about the future use of the building, and how will it benefit them? What will we use the building for? And is it going to be just open for tourism? Is it going to be used for community activities? How is it going to be used? And who is going to control it? The next slide, please. The community has also some concerns about the future of their village. The next slide, please. Will they be able to continue relying on it for their survival? Will it, I mean, after opening the village, after restoring the building, after restoring the building, will the community continue to rely on the yes, please. Will the community rely on the user enjoying their benefits? So the project team, we engage with the community, and the community discuss a lot of things, and they argue that will they be able to continue relying on the cost for their survival? Will they be kicked off the cost? Will they be prohibited to fish? Will there be any government sanctioning about their use of the coastal resources? They cite examples from other coasts, from other areas. For example, the Mnazi Bay Marine Park, where people have been restricted from fishing and engaging with with any marine activities without prior permission from the park authorities. So the community expressed this concern very earnestly and said, we need to know first whether we will be part of the innovation and will be able to continue enjoying the benefits of our cost. The next slide, please. Yeah, they said, why, as much as we welcome the idea of renovation, the idea of turning our village into a touristic destination, can we be oriented on how we can enjoy these benefits? Can we go and benchmark from other sides? Say, for example, Kilwa World Heritage Site, or Mikindani, or Bagamoyo, or any other site where they have successfully restored such kind of resources, and the community are enjoying it. So they would want to be part of it. They would want to be taken to these sites to learn more about how the touristic element can be incorporated with their daily life, and how can they be part of the innovations and own that kind of economy. Next slide, please. So with that one, they say, oh, we are part of the project and we will love to continue with the project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Valence and Nancy. It was a little bit of interruption, but we definitely got most of it. And before we go on to discussion, Elizabeth, would you be happy to give a response for about 5 minutes or so?
Yes, thank you so much, Valence and Nancy, and the organizers of this talk this evening from the Ugandan time. I want to thank the presenters for the presentation. I think this is quite enriching, looking at one of the areas that seem to be a little neglected, and especially trying to reconstruct our historiography, which, when you look at issues concerning slavery, like they rightly put, many emphasize the role played by the Arabs in this. I have maybe quite a number of questions that were posed as a result of the discussion that took place from the presenters. What is not clear to me is which line do you want to toe? Are you interested in the reconstruction of the site? Do you want to document issues concerning the French involvement in the site? Because from the literature, it suggests that the area you are considering is part of the southern part of the slave trade along the East African coast. Of course, there was mainly the northern part, which is usually emphasized. And this is what brings in the Portuguese, the British, and so on. And surprisingly, as we know historically, that the French were not the colonial masters in East Africa for the East African countries, but then they come in and participate in the slave trade around this. In the literature, especially from Alpers, he mentions that there were 5 stages that constitute the French slave trade along the East African coast. The first period is a period 1721 to 1734. And this was really like a period of chance. They were trying to find out if they could come in and all that. And then 1735 to 1770, we see usually the growth of economic activity, but the Portuguese came up with a policy towards the French, which was a little limiting, so they were trying to come in again. And in 1771 to 1784, now we see the single purpose of the French coming in and going as far as Cape Delgado, the northern limit of the Portuguese province. So from the presentation, we've been told that the French come in Mugao in 1784, and this actually coincides with the 4th period of Alpers, 1785 to 1794, which is seen as a period where we see the French participation in the trade along the East African coast, especially the southern part, which the study is considering, going in as far as the Caribbean, and that links the East African slave trade with the transatlantic slavery. So I wanted to find out, maybe as a way of a question to the presenters, Have you been able to see this kind of interaction between the West Indian slave trade, which is along the East African coast, and then the transatlantic slavery, which was taking place and where slaves were going that side? And the fifth period he mentions was 1795 to 1810, which comes in with the Napoleonic Wars, and then this British seizing some of the French provinces and all that. So I thought that looking at it based on these stages would also help. However, when the presenters now continue and give us their analysis of what happens at the East African coast, I would be interested in knowing in terms of the methods you use, because I relied mainly on what you have on your website concerning this project. You suggest that you used quite a number of methods. You talk about using archaeology, history, linguistics, geography, and all that. Have you been able to come, other than the beads that are mentioned, what other materials do we see that are related to slave trade? And anyway, why do you choose Mugao? Is it unique? Because I know that getting remains or material remains related to slavery has been hard for archaeologists. Is it unique? Is this something that is unique to Mugao alone? And then why did you choose Mugao? Just because maybe did not have a lot of literature? These are just for me questions just to open up, because I know that this is a very problematic area for archaeologists to get remains and evidence concerning slavery and slave trade. But at Mugao, it is even becoming problematic for me, in the sense that from the community seems to disassociate themselves from the French. The architecture remains don't seem to speak about the French, because they are saying that the inscriptions are also still associated with Muslims and Arabic, and then the tomb of Abdu and all that. So this also takes me to another question. Then what do we base on to show that there was French influence in this place? Are we sure that the site we are dealing with is really giving us evidence concerning the French activities within this site? What can do we have any material remains that you've come across, maybe from the nature of the beads that you've come across? How do they relate to the French activities or the French participation in slave trade along this East African coast, especially the southern part that you are dealing with? And maybe another thing, I can see that the community, like we said, okay, the community are worried. What next? What happens? But from the narratives and from what you show the community people are speaking about, it seems they also do not seem to talk about the French. So that's why I said that the project actually raises so many questions than answers, especially in regard to the French participation in slave trade on this site. Because from the materials, I'm not sure whether the beads that you have, because you did go further to show how did you analyze the beads, what kind of information do we get from the beads, how do they relate to the French act, or do they have any connections with those other French colonies, maybe where they were taking the slaves like Mauritius, Madagascar, and all that? Maybe that could help to create the link. But from the presentation today, I wasn't sure whether we can be able to clearly just post the link between the French participation in this slave trade and then the other people, sorry, and the people along this East African coast, especially at this site. Another issue is that the site seems to have several names, and maybe that is where the linguistics comes in. At times it is Mungalo, at another time it is Mugao, another there's also Mugao. How do these words and the different names, what do they mean? Maybe that could help to give us some information concerning the activities of slave trade, especially at this site along the East African coast. And it is really true that this is something really very interesting, especially bringing in the French, because like we normally know the Portuguese were along the East African coast, the Arabs were there, but the issue of the French is really a very pertinent issue, and I want to thank you. This is really a very interesting project, but maybe we need really, like I'm saying, let us look at the materials that we get. How do they relate to the French? If the narratives from the people seem to disassociate with the French activities at the coast, and for them, they are mainly looking at it as something maybe which is related to the Arabs, and maybe for obvious reasons, since many of them are Muslims, they would maybe want to, I don't know whether they would want to associate themselves more with the Arabs, since the majority of the people at this place maybe are mainly Muslims. Maybe we need to find out, are they mainly Muslims? I saw the numbers of the slaves that were taken outside to different countries from what you show on one of the slides. But in terms of the religious orientation of the people in this site, what are maybe the population percentages and all that for those who are Muslims and those who are Christians? Possibly this could explain why they wouldn't want to associate themselves with the non-Muslims or the non-Arabs, and they want everything to be Arabic. And also interpreting the inscriptions that are on this site. What happened to the slaves after slavery? Were there other forms of, as I said, I'll ask maybe, I pose many questions because the presentation actually just, I'm sorry, I'm not giving any answers, but the presentation simply, like it is really very rich that it actually brings out more questions than answers. And in one of the objectives, you state that you wanted to find out what happens to the slaves after slavery. Where are they? Okay, they may not be there, of course, right now. Do we have any evidence concerning what happens to the former slaves or to the legacies of these former slaves as the project was intended to dig out? So I want to
sorry,
okay,
I was just going to say that.
Really to stop it there. I know there is no time, but I want to thank you so much. This is a very interesting project. And with those so many questions raised and no answers, I think it will be really a very nice project moving forward and documenting it and archiving some of these memories that did not have the chance to be archived. Thank you so much, Prof. Lina, for the opportunity to talk about this project.
Elizabeth, thank you so much, and also bringing your own rich history to contextualize some of these other strands that Valence and Nancy are looking at. Valence and Nancy, you don't have to, I don't think all those questions are answerable, but I don't know if you want to try and approach some of them, especially those that move between the contemporary interpretations of the past and so on, which Elizabeth raised and which you started off with. I don't know who wants to jump in.
I will start, Lena, if you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Okay.
Well, I'll start with the name. Mongalo, Mgao. Actually, that was the root of this project, because when you look at the name in various documents and actually compare it with the name that the place is given today, it is confusion. So you find it in the map. If you can go back to the slide, but in the map, you see that they had a Portuguese corruption of the word. The French also corrupted it as well. So currently the site is actually called Mgao, and it's a name derived from the Makonde language. You can see it around here. Don't know whether this pointer is seen from your side. Near Suabo, then below it is Mangol. That Mangol is actually Mgao. That's the place we are talking about here. So you can see that the name itself has been corrupted, and it came to us as from the French archives what this site could be. And in tracing it, most of the time people were taking us to Mingoyo, which is another site connected with the French. And it has evidence of some jets and like places where boats could anchor. But Mgao is just bare. It has nothing that indicates that there was anything that landed there. But in terms of geography, when you talked about the methodology, in terms of geography and linguistically, the place that is Mgao, Mongalu, Mugalu is more related to Mgao, the present day Mgao, other than any other site that's related to the French slave trade in the southern coast of Tanzania. And I would say geographically because all this description describe that Mgao is close to a river that is entering the Indian Ocean, and it differentiates that part from Sudi Bay. So geographically, when you look at Mongalo or Mgao, this is where exactly you see all these features. You don't get the similar features in Mingoyo or in Kilwa, where also the French traded. And when you come to linguistically, the French archivists again also attest that the people were collected from Mgao were actually speaking languages of southern Tanzania, mostly Makonde. And you find that in Mgao, the people there are predominantly Makonde and Muslims, as you have put it. Actually, as we speak, there is no church in that place. And a few Christians are foreigners, are people come in for maybe work purposes, are not inhabitants, like original inhabitants of that place. So that's how linguistically we traced it that this site is actually Mgao and not any other site along the East African coast. And also we were actually saying that it was a search initially. It was a search for this site because of this predicament that I've shared, that when you look into documents and the name that the site has today, it was a bit confusing. So the first thing that we did was to search for the exact location of this site. And then after searching for the site in terms of the methods, we did ethnography to collect information about this connection, whether the people knows about all this entanglement between the Arabs, French, and I should say that apart from the Arabs, other people who are also prominent and remembered in Mgao are the Germans and British during the First World War, because Sudi, which is adjacent to Mgao, was one of the severe First World War battle. So you understand that the French are completely out of the picture and never mentioned anyway. And this mentioning was also recorded in the 1950s, 1960s interviews that were collected by the first history students of the University of Dar es Salaam. And these are in the University of Dar es Salaam library, indicating the entanglement between the Germans and the British during the First World War. Now, none of these still mentions the French. Now, this actually comes to your question about what then make us think that this is a French related site or French slave trade site. You mentioned about the beads. The beads that we excavated there, as you put it, they are more related to the European beads. Unfortunately, we didn't prepare that slide indicating the beads and the analysis that went through it, but it is based on the imported material, the quantity of the imported material, most of which from the European world rather than the Arabic world. And these are actually obtained from about 7 trenches that were excavated in Mgao. I should also say that these do not appear without contamination with other features. For instance, we found in front of the monument, we found a burial within a burial. So on top, there was an Arabic burial where you find the tombs that you could also find in Kilwa, in Kaole. But underneath them, we found tombstones again, new tombstones. So there is still this entanglement between these communities, some of which we have not come into terms.
Thank you, Nancy. Are you still there? You've just gone silent for a minute.
Maybe I think, hello, everyone can hear me? Maybe I think.
Yeah, that's good. Yep.
The internet again has taken us advantage of us. Nancy, I think, is gone again, but she has explained most of the things that we then Elizabeth paused. I just want to stress on two things about the connection of the slave trade and the French. When we were conducting archaeological research in Mugao, we have only these two things that linked us to the French. And Nancy mentioned about the beads. The preliminary analysis of the beads is of the European type of beads, and they date back to the 17th century because of the association with the similar beads that have been collected from other places in Tanzania, and they have gone back to the 16th, 17th century. So looking at them, we will say, okay, fine. If these materials are found in this particular site and they are of this particular origin, then could be relatively safe to associate them with the French who are of the European origin. And the second thing that Nancy mentioned before she was interrupted is the barriers that we encounter, a barrier within a barrier. On top of that, we found the Arabic barriers, and then underneath it, we found other tombstones with barrier remains that seems to predate the former barrier, and they were down to about 80 to 90 centimeters underground, which is pretty much deeper, and it's safe to say. The question which Kiazike posed about what happened with the slaves, where did they go? I mean, could be the same people who were participating in the slave trade, but it's yet to be confirmed as the analysis is not yet complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valence, and thanks to Nancy when she's back. Now I'd like to open the floor to discussion to any of our speakers today, whether it's to Valence and Nancy's fort or to Camillo and Hanadi's and Nanor's previous presentation. So I think for the moment we could probably put on our cameras until Nancy's able to come back, and then if she needs to speak again, we can always reduce them. So I don't know if there's any questions to any of our speakers. I wanted to ask in terms of just the connections with the community, because both respondents raised those issues in terms of connections with the community and what does the community want. And of course, in both of these contexts, it's very, very different to what we're referring to as community. And I'm thinking of Camillo saying we tried to get away from this notion of community. And the question is always that, actually, to what extent are researchers, whether local researchers or other researchers, actually invited to carry out this research and what results from it, and what kind of hopes are built up from the research. So I don't know if anybody from the presenters wants to answer that question. I think I just want to push you a little bit more to the earlier questions of, accessibility to the sites, accessibility to results. And in the case of Valence and Nancy, it's really having a say in what is actually going to be built there, and whether the dangers of having something exposed, which I think you guys, Camillo and Hanadi and Nanor, you talked about in a very different way in terms of what can be exposed and the dangers of that. So this is I haven't got anybody specifically in mind, but I was just wondering that in terms of our notion about egalitarian archival practice, one of the things is always the people who are participating or who become will become that's the right word, custodians of the stories and any other kind of interventions.
I mean, I would say from our side, three people we got rejections from 3 persons basically to do the interviews, because for them, in their perception, there's nothing to talk about, which was intriguing for us. Now, we don't know where this is coming from. I mean, if they're not suffering enough or they're not seeing what's happening around, or it wasn't clear, I would say, why the engagement they didn't want to engage on one hand. As I said in the presentation, part also of declination was because of political alliance, I would say. So to go back to the question of engaging the community, I think it's the way we did it, I would say, is that we related to them, because to approach these people, we told them that we're living the same experiences, basically. And this is why the kind of shared experience was very engaging, I would say. This is what actually pushed people to talk to us and really to contribute, to give us the material that they have, pictures, and all these private, I would say, belongings. I'm not sure if it answered the question, but this kind of reflection to your question, Elena.
Yeah, Hanadi, it also makes me think, and also between these presentations that, and I'd like to bring in Geraldine and Frieslaar in terms of historic things as well, is that what you're talking about in the community is still an unfinished kind of trauma and an ongoing kind of suffering, which is very, very recent. And I think some of the context that we think about in South Africa and in Tanzania, and also some of the West Coast and where Elizabeth works in Uganda, that in some ways, this is also unfinished, especially when you think about restitution. However, we're talking many generations later, but maybe that's the wrong way to approach it. I don't know, Geraldine, Elizabeth, and Valence, whether you want to come in on here in terms of kind of historic versus today's community and intergenerational kinds of ways of reflecting on this violence. I also am reminded by what Hanadi and Camillo and Nanor mentioned in terms of there's an expectation of this violence, kind of like what's new because it's there, but does that actually help? So I'm gonna stop there and see if anybody wants to reflect on that, especially historically.
Yep. Can I come in?
Yeah, sure, Valence. Yep.
Yeah. I think if we take the case of Mgao and why the community is so cautious about any development in the area, there could be about a couple of reasons actually. First of all, the dependence, their livelihood depends very much on what we are telling them could be more beneficial if it is turned into touristic center, if it's open to the outside community. And therefore, they think by opening up and bringing in other people may threaten this kind of relationship they have with the environment, with their coastal and monuments, whatever thing we are talking about. And also they draw these examples from other places, other areas that they are aware of within Mtwara itself. For example, the Mnazi Bay Park and other areas. There are some laws that have been introduced to restrict their movement along the coast, and the Mgao people don't want that. Or even if it's gonna come, they want to be part of it. They want to be informed. They want to be brought on the table and be told why you are bringing this kind of restriction. How are we going to live without these restrictions? And the third thing is that we have been telling them is that Mgao itself is now being encroached by the developmental projects. There's this large industry by the Dangote Industrial Cement is now coming to Mgao. It's got a very huge chunk of land, and soon or later it will be opened up by these people, and therefore the area will be opened up whether the Mgao people want it or not. So it's good to get prepared for that. Another thing is, the government has designated Mgao as a touristic destination, but are the people really ready for that? How are they prepared to welcome those things and be part of it? So if we put all those things out anyway, if we don't want to ask those questions and work with the Mgao people and try to help them understand why these things are happening, they have been very friendly so far. They have been very welcoming, and they engage with us very freely, and they are really keen to understand more and more and be part of the work.
Thank you, Valence. I see Elizabeth's got her hand up. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think from the projects that are here and issues of the community related to what I also deal with as slavery, one of the key issues we have, I think, to work on is reconceptualizing the term heritage. Is heritage necessary to be the only good part of our heritage? How do we document this, which has been so much written about, and I use my fingers to show in quotes, dark heritage, hurting heritage? How do we make people associate with this bad part of the history, if I use that term? I think that is where the key issue is. That's why sometimes people say, oh, I will be safer not to make the community remember about this history, which is like hurting them, rejuvenating those bad feelings about what they went through. And I think this takes us to really rethinking what is heritage. Is heritage only about the good part of the past, or we can also be able to talk freely about the bad or hurting bits of our heritage, but as professionals in a better way, which is not going again to arouse memories of the torture, the atrocities that people went through. For me, that is what I can comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I wonder if Geraldine, if you can hear me, it would be great to hear some aspects, because of course what I realize is one of the things that South Africa does have, but perhaps not in the same way in Lebanon and Uganda, but I just don't know enough, is a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And of course that has that kind of a role to play, which Elizabeth has just been talking about. I don't know, Geraldine, if you wanted to reflect on that at all. Maybe she's having also trouble. But I don't know if Camillo or Hanadi, I mean, presumably the difference is we're talking about dark heritage, that is something done to one group, or it's conceived as that, as distinct from something that's seen as a civil war, which is a very different kind of relationship to that. Oh, Geraldine? Yeah.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I was just changing between the laptop and the phone. So
that's okay.
So you were asking me about reflections on the TRC.
Yeah, well, in the sense that the kind of the dark kind of heritage Elizabeth just mentioned, and we've been talking about, in the context of South Africa, this is very particular. So does that play that kind of role of allowing a safer space for reflection, what Elizabeth referred to as dark heritage?
Right. So, I mean, yeah, the NATO tourism, I guess that's what they call it. So there's not really, I think there are bits of it in South Africa, but it's not really given a space because of the triumphalist narrative that's post-apartheid, that characterizes heritage in South Africa in the post-apartheid, where the focus was really on reconciliation and nation building, and using heritage as a tool towards that goal. So not focusing on the dark aspects of heritage, and even going as far as where the democratic state funds, things like the Voortrekker Monument in Pretoria, for example, or the Afrikaanse Taal Museum in Paarl, which are all symbols of apartheid South Africa. But that was the kind of the negotiated part of the negotiated settlement. So, where like aspects of dark tourism is not really spoken about. Even a site like Constitution Hill, where the precinct, the prison, has seen a lot of obviously gross human rights violations. Those are all sites that became symbols of the human spirit over adversity, and falling right in line with that kind of nationalist, triumphalist discourse of what the new state wanted to carve out for itself. don't know if that really answers the question.
Well, I think I'm not sure there is an answer, but that definitely helps because I mean, Hanadi and Camillo, do you want to come back on that? Because that's what you were asked to kind of think about, that kind of unified narrative, and maybe Nanor as well, that you were saying actually doesn't exist, but perhaps there are real dangers in trying to get towards one, and the way Geraldine just described happened in South Africa, or maybe it's just so different, the context, that we can't begin to think of them in parallel at all. So I don't know if anybody from your team.
Look, I leave to the other for that. I think is an important point about the unified, but and is worth a continuous conversation. I think there is two risks here of doing, you know, blind parallelism between different contexts, which is something we need to be aware of. I think the point that we were trying to make, or at least my interpretation of that, was that the differences of uses of multiple archive and stories that are not even tangential one to each other are perpetuating the crisis. So are both a risk of perpetuating the fragmentation and therefore used instrumentally to that, rather than one homogeneous national histories. And I think there is where probably the language is wrong, the word is wrong, but homogeneous or unique or unifying is probably in our intentions to not be seen as a homogeneous, monolithic, only one state driven, but more kind of a convergence of that, or at least the convergence or the tangential space where different forms of archive, narrative, stories, values attached to that are potentially generating not the perpetuation of crisis. And I think that is what we have witnesses in Lebanon, is the fact that violence is not only enforced and happening, but is perpetuated by different institutions, states across time. And I think that is the fact that you cannot freeze those elements, but those elements of violence are continuously unfolding in the definition of archive and in the uses or the commodification of them. This is one point. And the other one, I think, is also the value that we gave to the archive. The value is something that, of course, when we are not coming from a very heritage perspective as a discipline, but for us, what was very challenging was the opportunity to give an alternative, different values than the one that is given from the official voices of archive. And value, I mean value to manifest, value to become a symbol, value to, record something. Here you see the material we have manipulated was a very personal value, was a very non-economic value, was very, very unmaterial to a certain extent. And there are different adjectives that we use: everyday, mundane, kind of personal and hidden. I think we're speaking about the possibility of an archive not to immediately determine a value, but searching other forms of value that can be exchanged through, conversation. And the third point maybe is is a very simple, banal reflection, which is related to this idea of communities or issue that we were saying before. To me, there is a very difference is somehow, and very important to mention, is what is the institutional framework through which these elements are coming and emerging. In our case, there's very few institutions that are playing the role of mediators of, both the narrative, the stories, the individual. For us, the encounter was very much central with this narrative of political parties, for example. So institutions that were, brokering the role between states and community in different manner, both positive and negative, both with presupposition of futures and others. So whether in others, so less, put it in this way, less municipalities, less arts, less, and I think that conversation has to be expanded to other more heritage focus or heritage speaking specific institution that might have different agendas in constructing that stories. So it's just a very simple reflections across the difference to see that I think the conversation is very much important to not only the egalitarian way, but what is the value that emerge and the possibility of negotiation of that values that could be attached to different forms of archive that we all discover collectively.
Thank you for that, Camillo. I don't know if anybody wants to come out, but I'm really conscious of time and people have stayed with us much longer than we expected, but perhaps the final words can go to Nancy, and I see Nancy's rejoin and Valence. And either to respond to what you've just said, or perhaps to introduce something that hasn't been used in terms of the questions anyway, which is the urban side of it. So what you've presented is a very urban kind of history. And I think what Nancy, Valence, and also Elizabeth are talking about imperial histories in a non-urban context. And I wonder if we could maybe say something about that, Valence and Nancy, or anything else that you find interesting, and then we'll stop there.
Hello, Lena.
Hi, Nancy.
Yeah, I was just finishing up, but I hope Valence continued where I was disrupted.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, so we've just been discussing things after that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so maybe a small thing that I wanted to say is that we are following up with this will be the like purposive erasure of the French in the documents, in the memories of the people of Mgao, or this is actually something accidental. And we are also looking into the underwater past to see if there is also any evidence that will be in terms of the marine relics, shipwrecks, and things related to underwater past. And we have just done the preliminary of that, which also did not yield much that can be attested to the same story. But we are still hoping that we'll be able to gather something that can also connect it to the maritime remains from that side.
Thanks, Nancy. I think Nancy disappeared again. So I think, unfortunately, she didn't get to confront the other bit, but I don't know if anybody has any final words about anything, or we could just leave it with a question, that question. Hanadi, did you, sorry, I thought you were unmuting, but maybe not, no. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone who participated, and thank you for being so patient with all the issues around technology today. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time to fully listen, especially to Nanor's presentation of the incredible website, but I hope everybody will get a chance to go and explore it. And we look forward to developing these projects further, and see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Bye.